Namaste, everyone. It is really a pleasure not only to be back in India, but more importantly, to be among all of our Indian friends again. Devi and I really are more Indian in our souls than we are American, and so it's always kind of a fulfilling experience for us to come to India. We arrived a little less than a week ago, and we'll be here until the first week of December. We'll leave and go back to America December 7th. So those of you who are watching this evening, we will have a chance to see most of you, or maybe all of you, in person, and that will be a great joy. It was just on the 12th of September was the anniversary of the time that Swami Kriyanandaji met his great master, Paramahansa Yoganandaji. And so we wanted to talk about Swami's discipleship and also his relationship with Master, and then what he did with that relationship, because all of us, in one way or another, have to form our own authentic relationship with the Guru. We all have to form a relationship with Master, and we have to develop that relationship. When Swami first read Autobiography of a Yogi, and he has often described this, he was desperate in his search for truth. At the beginning of his search for truth, he would not have defined it as a search for God. And the same was true for me. When I read Autobiography of a Yogi, I would have to say that I felt that I was, if not an atheist, at least an agnostic. An atheist believes that there is no God. An agnostic basically says, I don't know whether there is or there isn't, but I don't have the sense that I can believe in something that I don't know exists. And therefore, an agnostic is kind of a cursed creature because he's sitting on the fence and not knowing which way to go. Nonetheless, that's where I was. For me, it was the only honest approach that I felt that I could take at that time. For Swami, he had progressed from basically a mild belief in God, but not an active one, not one that felt that it could really be a relationship, a lifelong relationship that was meaningful. That was up until about a half a year before he found the Autobiography of a Yogi. About a half a year before, he had a long walk in which he pondered the question of what is consciousness, why are we conscious, and came up in his own mind, in his own heart, with the answer, the only possible answer that seemed correct to him, is that we're conscious because there is a consciousness in the universe. There is a God who is conscious, and that God gives us consciousness. And so, in his own mind, that was a huge breakthrough. Now, we have to understand that Swami had long been a devotee, and he'd long been a disciple of Master. This was from previous lifetimes. And so it's a curious thing that we all have, one might say, to struggle with, is that we may have a deep past history of a profound relationship with God, or a profound relationship with a master or a line of gurus, a line of teaching, and yet in the early part of our present life, that has not come to the surface. And so we may go through serious doubt, we may go through periods where we are not yet ready to accept the fact that we're on a spiritual path at all of that, it's all kept obscured from us. And so we're kind of wandering in this miasma, but that's the conscious mind and the subconscious patterns. As that begins to clarify, meaning that miasmic fog, as that begins to part a little bit, and we get ready in our soul and in our human personality to begin a deeper search, begin a search for truth, then God will take our past efforts that are never lost. That's what it says in the Gita, that all of our efforts, spiritually speaking, none of that is ever lost. So if we have been seeking in past lives, that is all there prepping us to continue that search in this life. But until that consciousness surfaces, it may seem that we have a complete discontinuity between past search and present search. And so it was to a certain extent for Swamiji. And as I say, it was the same for me. Now, Swamiji was, even before he came to the acceptance of God, and as I say, then following quickly after that, the Guru came to him in the form of the autobiography of a yogi. But even before that, he had, even though he couldn't accept God as the solution, he had an intense search for truth. And so the intense search for truth, if it's carried out in a deep way and in an honest way over many lifetimes, will inevitably lead to a relationship with God, because God is the ultimate truth. But in this life, that had not yet surfaced for Swamiji until this long walk. After that, as I say, within a few months, he read Autobiography of a Yogi, and that book absolutely captivated his heart, his mind, his soul, and he was just in a period. In fact, I'm sure that Master arranged it such that he was just in a period where his parents had left to do work in Egypt, and he was alone. He didn't have responsibility. He didn't have anyone currently on the scene telling him, you must do this, you must not do that. He was free. And at that time, the Autobiography of a Yogi came to him, when he could really do something about it. Many, many people that we have met over the many years that we've been on the spiritual path have read the autobiography, but their circumstances have been such that they can't do anything about it. They can't express the changes that that book begins to make. This was not true of Swami. So he came across country. Excuse me, I'm going to get some water. He came across country on a bus trip. He met Master, and at that very first meeting, he said, I want to be your disciple. That was a huge step for him, because Swamiji was an extremely accomplished person. And so as he was going through his adolescence and his, late teenage years and his college career, he was brighter and smarter and more perceptive than anyone around him, including his professors. And so he had, as he says himself, he had a little intellectual arrogance at that time. It was just one of the developments of his developing personality. And so for him to be ready to say to someone, I'm ready to be your disciple, was a big step for him. But that broke open one could say, the wall that held him from his life's work, from his past karma of being a devotee, his past karma of this deep relationship with Yoganandaji. He had been his son in successive lives and carried on Yogananda's mission in this life. Again, he was destined to be his spiritual son and to carry on his spiritual mission. But when Swamiji came to Master and said, I want to be your disciple, that was, from that time on, that discipleship became the core of his existence, of his way that he led his life, of how he evaluated what to do, what not to do, everything. That relationship of discipleship was really the center of everything that followed, including the founding of Ananda and the magnetism that drew all of us who knew him personally, and by extension, all of those who have been drawn to this work of Ananda that Swamiji started. But I would like to talk about two aspects of his discipleship. For some reason, my throat is quite dry tonight. I want to talk, Master said that our path is a combination of meditation and service. And so that's kind of symbolic, but our path is a spiritual search, including meditation, the use of the techniques, the following, the understanding, the imbibing of the spiritual teachings, and then the other part of that is to take those teachings and express them in daily life. And those two parts, one might say, is the deep search for self-realization or moksha. And that must be done deep in our own consciousness with the withdrawal of the life force and the uplifting of the life force in deep meditation. As Master says in his great poem, Samadhi, by longer, deeper, guru-given meditation comes this celestial Samadhi. And so that deep inner search, and I'll talk about that aspect of Swami's discipleship. Then the other aspect is that is to take us deep into our own self, but one might say it's to take us into a state of consciousness that goes beyond the bubble of Maya, beyond the dream world that we all live in. And so we have to both seek going beyond this dream world, beyond the world of Maya, and then we also simultaneously have to work to work is not quite the right term. We have to have an ongoing effort in our lives to lead a life that is dharmic, that is uplifted, that is kind, that is in alignment with God's will while we're still functioning in this dream. And so simultaneously, we have to live properly within the dream and then live in a deep meditative sadhana in order to break the bubble of the dream and get beyond it. And those two, one might say, slightly different aspects of the path were expressed so beautifully in Swamiji's life. First, I'll talk about his spiritual search. When Swami came to Master in 1948, he knew nothing about the spiritual life. He'd read a very short little section of the Bhagavad Gita. It had excited him. He had read the autobiography of a yogi, but he had no training. He had no knowledge of meditation. He had no knowledge of techniques. In 1948, in America, meditation was not known. Now it is, because of Master, because of Swami. But at that time, it was not known. And therefore, Swami didn't have any reference point. He hadn't been trained in it. He hadn't had any knowledge. When he came to to Master, to Yoganandaji, he threw himself into his efforts in sadhana. He meditated many, many hours a day. Master told him to develop devotion. He got a harmonium and he began learning how to play that harmonium, and he chanted many, many hours a day. So his sadhana was an intense sadhana, and that intensity of sadhana led him very quickly into deep states. As I said, these are states that were achieved in a past life, but had to be re-achieved in this life. And so that intense sadhana led him to long meditations, developing deep devotion. But more than that, he had an absolute conviction that whatever Master said was obviously correct. Sometimes people would come and tell him something that he couldn't accept, maybe about a miracle or some, I don't know, esoteric teaching. And Swamiji would always say, "Did Master say that?" And if the person said, "Yes, Master said that," then he said, "I may not understand it, but I accept it." And so that acceptance of the Guru's teachings as being absolutely fundamentally true and right was a kind of a core that allowed Swamiji to throw himself into his spiritual search. Later on, as he became a teacher in his own right, he became extremely creative in how to express these teachings, but extremely orthodox in never changing the teachings themselves. As an example, most of you will have had the technique of Hong Sa. And so Devi and I have attended, I don't know, perhaps 50 classes on Hong Sa by Swamiji. The technique as he gave it was always the same in every class. He didn't deviate. But the whys of why we practice Hong Sa, how to enrich the practice, all of the, one might say, different facets of that diamond. He never changed the stone, but he would look at a different facet of that stone, and no two talks were ever alike. So he was extremely orthodox and extremely creative at the same time. Now, Devi and I have met many, many teachers, and teachers of the Ananda line. And because of the training of Swamiji, most of the Ananda teachers are extremely orthodox in the teaching of the techniques. And we talk among ourselves about Hong Sa, how to teach it, what little elements of it, how to enhance the practice of it, all of that. But we never talk among ourselves about, "Oh, I don't think Master ever taught it quite correctly because I read in this other book that you don't say Hong Sa, you say So Hum. And so let's change it to So Hum." That's not the way Master taught it. There are deep reasons why he didn't teach it that way, which I'm not going to go into. But what I'm making the point is that there's an extreme orthodoxy to following what Master and therefore Swamiji taught. And so the techniques, the essence of the techniques, why we practice them, the control of energy, withdrawal of prana, the moving of that prana up to the higher chakras, all of that, which is the essence of the teachings of this path, are very clear and very orthodox. But at the same time, if you're describing Hong Sa to a group of, as we did in Chennai last year, a group of young women who were in a college, technical college. We didn't teach Hong Sa, but we lectured to a group of about 300 young women in a technical college in Chennai, if you're talking to that group, you would use a different language. You would use different examples. You would use different stories than you might if you were talking to a group of people who, as we do at some of our seminars, where people have been coming repeatedly to Ananda for 20 or 25 years, you wouldn't talk in the same way. You'd approach the subject, but as I say, you wouldn't change the essence of the subject. So Swamiji was extremely dedicated to Master, and because then what his life's work, and Master told him that this was his life's work, his life's work was to take these teachings and to write about them. And so Master said, your life's work is writing and editing. And because of that, Swamiji said, well, this is the life's work my Master has given me. He was a person of enormous energy. And so as part of that flow, he wrote 150 different books, but all of them led back to like spokes on a wheel. The hub of the wheel is round, and it might have many, many spokes. The wheel itself is round, might have many, many spokes, but all of those spokes lead back to the same one hub. So Swamiji, when he was writing his books, he might write one on astrology, he might write another on evolution, a third on Christian Bible, a fourth on the Bhagavad Gita, and on and on and on. But all of those led back to the teachings of his great guru. He was constantly mentally thinking about Master. Devi and I were with him often, and he would just spontaneously, as if picking up a conversation, he would say, oh yes, this is what Master, I remember what Master said about this. We might be looking at a sunset, and suddenly he would remember something Master had said about the sky or the clouds or the sunset. He was, in the back of his mind, he was constantly connected to and referencing Master. He said that for many, many years, he prayed deeply that Master guide every single thought that he had. And then at some point, he said he realized that was not enough, that he wanted then Master also to guide every feeling that he had, every action that he did, so that Master became the reference point for everything. Now that's what I mean about discipleship. See, discipleship is not, oh, I'll take this vow and then I'll kind of go about my daily business. Discipleship grows deeper and deeper and deeper the more we become connected in our hearts and in our minds and in our souls and in our actions by trying to always be in line with and express attunement with the Guru. As that happens, the expression, the difference between the guidance that we receive from the Guru and our own thoughts, those begin to, the difference begins to diminish until Swamiji, later on in his life, said, I no longer know where Kriyananda leaves off and Yogananda begins, because in his mind, he had so long referenced everything to his Guru that his Guru was a living presence within him, so much so, and so deep was his attunement that he didn't even know where the two became separated. And so that is the ultimate goal of discipleship, which is to so align our thoughts and feelings and actions with that of the Guru that we essentially merge with the Guru. Then we have to take all of that deep discipleship and we have to express it in our daily lives, in the work we do, in the relationships that we have. We should constantly think as much as we can. See, it's a question of memory to remind ourselves to do this. But if we can train ourselves to ask the simple question in our mind, is this what you want me to do, Master? What should I say to this person, Master? How should I cook this meal, Master? How should I write this article? Please give me the thoughts, give me that constant reference in everything that we do. It doesn't mean that we'll ever cook the way Master would cook. We will cook the way Master would want us to cook. We won't write, we won't have the same personality, we won't speak like Master, but if we constantly reference our discipleship to as the core of our being, then Master will guide us to be the most perfect expression of who we should be, that it's possible to have. And that's the life of discipleship that Swamiji showed us, that Swamiji modeled for us. And because of that, and the combination of magnetism, see, once we align with the infinite, align our will, then the infinite can flow through our will. And that enormous power flowing through our will creates magnetic aura, magnetic field around. And so Swami was very magnetic. People were drawn to him, and people would act in such a way that he would uplift their consciousness. So in all these ways, Swamiji showed us how to be great disciples of Master.
Hello, everyone. I too am very glad to be here with you and to talk about our great teacher, divine friend, role model as a disciple, shining light into this world, Swami Kriyananda. In the latter part of his life, Swami published a book called Religion in the New Age. And it was a collection of essays, one of which was Religion in the New Age. And in it, he talked about, as we move from it talked about the Yuga cycle, where as we move from Kali Yuga, the dark age, the age of form, of confinement, of limited consciousness, as we move into Dwapara Yuga, the age of energy, the age where space seems to disappear, that the practice of religion, man's relationship with God, begins to change. In Kali Yuga, people would go, particularly in the West, they would go to these churches, which were like little boxes, and there was this priest who stood high above them and talking down to the poor sinners, and high above them were the angels and the archangels and God above that. And it was all very based on form and hierarchy. Well, as we move away from that into this age in which we're now living, people are not that interested in form. There was a recent survey in America that the great majority of people, I think it was something like 80%, said they didn't consider themselves religious, but they considered themselves spiritual. And in a sense, that might define the difference between Kali Yuga religion, where it's based on form and doing what you're told, or being based on a personal relationship with God. And I think that's the essence of religion in the New Age, in Dwapara Yuga, the personal relationship with God. But what Swami represented, he showed that to us, but he also, I think, represented discipleship in the New Age. Because East-West, their old concept of discipleship is passive, is, oh, the guru does it all for you. Swami tells a story in his autobiography, The New Path, in which there was a young Bengali disciple who lived with Master in the ashram, but he was always joking and laughing and being too light-minded. And Master one day chastised him for this, saying, you're keeping everybody's minds restless and stirred up where you should be deeper. And this young man said, Bengali said, oh, I want to change, Master, but how can I do so without your blessings? And Master became very powerful and forceful and said, God's blessings are there. My blessings are there. It is your blessings that are lacking. And this is the essence of what Swami represented in discipleship in the New Age. It's really saying, I will use, with my willpower, I will put into practice the teachings that the Guru has given me. I won't just passively wait. And then the other, I think, erroneous expression of discipleship is to give it lip service, but not to take it internally, where you just say, okay, that's the Guru, but you know, he doesn't really know that much. He doesn't know about this. He never talked about that, so I'm gonna just do it my way. And so the one way is too passive, just saying, oh, Guru will do it all. The other is sort of putting the Guru in a little box and saying, well, I'll accept this much of his teachings, but not in totality, not when it becomes threatening to my ego. Swami found, I think, the perfect thread to pick it up with. He found, based on Master said there are two highest prayers, and Swami lived them both. The first one is this: I will reason, I will, I will act, but guide thou my reason, will, and activity to the proper end in all things. And that's what Swami's life was. Kriyananda, the name he chose when he took monastic vows as entering the Swami order, means joy through the practice of Kriya, also joy in action, through action. And so Swami had the deep devotion and attunement and courage to say, Master has told me that I have a great work to do. He didn't outline it. He didn't give me instructions. He just said, you have a great work to do. And so with that motivation, he said inwardly, I will reason, I will act, Master. And all of the incredible worldwide work that has flowed from that one soul is an expression of that simple prayer. He reasoned, he willed, he acted, but always in attunement with Master. And Master guiding him always, and not with passivity, but with conscious attunement. And that's the point that we all need to understand in our spiritual life if we want to advance towards inner freedom, to have that dynamic expression. And will we make mistakes sometimes? Of course we will. Will the Guru always make it really clear what his will for us is in any particular situation? It's not been my experience. But in the end, if we try, if we pick ourselves up when we fall down, if we recognize that we got off track, pick up again and keep going, then we begin more and more to enter into a flow. And then the second aspect, that second highest prayer that Master said was, Lord, give me thyself that I may give thee to all. And that's what we saw in Swami's life. And those of you friends here in India, you saw him in the last decade of his life. He came here 2003, he left the body in 2013, and his body no longer had the physical strength to do things he had done earlier in his life. But those years were the most precious, I believe, because as the body declined, the spirit and the attunement and the oneness with his guru became ever, ever greater. And when you watch the body of beautiful talks that Swami gave throughout India, sometimes he could barely talk because he was weeping just at the thought of his guru. And yet he could have stayed in some secluded spot up in the Himalayas or where in some sacred place and just communed with his guru. But that wasn't what his karma was, wasn't what his destiny was, nor was it what Master gave him to do. And so he wanted God so that he could give him to all. And both of these aspects together, I think for all of us, yes, we can praise the greatness of Swami, but he would not want us to stop there. He would want us, whether we have an outward work to do or not, he would want us to carry on in the spirit that he started, so that we think for ourselves, but always referring to the Guru. We act, we will, but always tuning in. And then the desire to share with others. And you hear in so many of his talks, trying to instill that vibrancy, that vibrant spiritual life into his disciples. And you know, Swami said towards the end of his life, the only thing I want to be remembered for is that I was a good disciple. And it's a beautiful statement. And one could actually meditate on it for quite a long time because it has layers and layers of meaning. Because ultimately, to be a good disciple means to become one with the Guru. It isn't just a little person saying, oh, yes, Master, yes, Master. To be a good disciple means to, with every fiber of your being, give yourself inwardly in the process of self-transformation, to scour away every vestige of ego, to work on the consciousness. And so all that is reflected there is God's presence. And to have that day by day reference, point of reference to the Guru. So to be a disciple, to be a good disciple, is really for devotees. And Swami was showing us this. It's the highest goal, because inherent in discipleship is spiritual freedom. Once we truly and sincerely, to whatever ability we can, begin walking the path of sincere discipleship, we need to understand, not with pride and not with, self-satisfaction, but we do need with humility and gratitude to understand we have taken up the path to freedom, because Swami has told us that it is only through the agency of the God-given Guru that the soul finds freedom. We can't do it on our own. It's not the divine law. God's way is that it is through the agency of the Guru. And when you think about it, how beautiful that God, who is omnipresent and infinite and omniscient and all those big, big words beyond our ability to really understand what they mean, he sends a channel that will love us in a divine way, that knows us from the inside out, that accepts who we are absolutely, completely, without judgment, without any hesitation. And the Guru comes as Master said of his own Guru, Sri Yukteswar, as the spoken voice of silent God. And how beautiful. It didn't have to be that way. You know, just as you look at, you smell a fragrant rose, and you think, Lord, it didn't have to be this way. It didn't have to be so beautiful. And God could have perhaps found another way for us to achieve freedom that wasn't through the guru-disciple relationship. But what contained in that relationship is the fulfillment of the highest expression of love. And the scriptures all say God is love, and the Guru is his living instrument, and how lucky we are to be drawn to the feet of a Prem avatar of Yoganandaji, who, as his disciples gave him the title Prem avatar, meaning incarnation of divine love. And Swami helped us to see the depth of who that great master was, to show us how to walk the path of discipleship. And so if we only worship Swami and put him on a pedestal, I don't think he would be pleased with that attitude. Of course we have reverence for him, but I think he would say, get up and do something about it. Work for the Guru, serve the Guru, know the Guru, just as I did. And then you will find what I have found at the end of my life. We were just recently visiting our community. Jyotish and I were recently visiting our community in Ananda, Assisi. And this is where Swami was when he left the body. And he had a small house there. And he left the body in a little bedroom where he slept each night. And people come there from all the devotees from all over Europe, really, to meditate in this small room where Swami left the body. And we had the chance also to meditate there. And the vibrations are so powerful, so filled with absolute joy and freedom that it leaves no doubt in your mind where Swami is now, beyond the reaches of our emotions, beyond the reaches of our ability to talk with him on a physical level. But in the realm of divine joy and freedom, Swami dwells now. And I believe he's calling us there. If you want to be with me, follow the path that I walked. It is a sure and true path, and every sincere seeker will find, as I did, the presence of God and the merging and union with God. So to give a tribute to Swami is to say, I will live my life as you lived yours. Give me the clarity and strength, Master, to do it as well as Swami did it. And this is our prayer and our wish for all of you. May we all deepen our discipleship. May we use Swami's example of following, of walking the path of discipleship. And may we, as the beautiful song says, be one in the light of God and Guru one day in the near future. God bless you all.